Welcome to the Celtic Way morning briefing live for Wednesday, July the 20th. There's plenty to talk about today, and with me to do that is Alison McConnell. How are we today, Alison? Hopefully gremlin free.
And significantly cooler. I'm not kind of losing half a stone here as I did in the show yesterday in this wee furnace in my office. But yeah, all good, thank you.
Good. Now, first things first, obviously, a wee word for our sponsors. OneFootball. You can download the app via the link in the description or through the usual app stores. And essentially, it's your one-stop shop for things like scores, fixtures, lineups, etc., etc. But even better than that, if I say so myself, is just down below there. It's our own website subscription offer, which right now is £3 for 3 months for full access to every bit of content that we put out, which includes things like detailed match ratings, analysis, features, opinion pieces, videos, the lot. The link to do that, as always, will be in the description, so why not give us a go? So, Alison, there's only one place to start, really. Kind of touches on stuff that we were talking about yesterday, but it's obviously moved on to a massive extent because Celtic made a double signing yesterday afternoon. Mooy and Moritz Jenz were both announced. What's your thoughts, first and foremost?
Yeah, I think both seemed inevitable when we spoke about it yesterday morning. It did seem as though it was just a case of dotting I's and crossing T's. It just seemed that they were ready to get over the line. I think Aaron Mooy's quite an interesting one. I think he brings experience. I think he brings a physicality. I think an industry to the middle of the park, and I don't think there was any real surprise. I think when Ange Postecoglou said on Saturday we're hopefully getting two over the line, I don't think you'd say that publicly unless you know that it's imminent. You know that it's on the horizon. That it's you're on the cusp of announcing it. I wonder where it leaves Celtic in terms of maybe Christopher Julian going out now. I wonder what else it leaves in terms of the squad. Is there one other maybe still to come in, or might that be it for the summer? I think that would be the 7th. Is that 7 signings now?
7 signings, as long as you include Maida, which a lot of people don't seem to, but it was made permanent this summer, so I'll always include them.
6 or 7 signings in, however you look at it. I think that's probably more. In some ways, I think that might be more than some would have anticipated at the end of the season. When you think across now the 3 transfer windows that Ange Postecoglou's had, he has pretty much transformed the squad that he inherited this time 13 months ago.
Well, I want to say it's 20. I'm trying to think because the loanees obviously counted in the 17 from last year. So if you count all 3 of them, so about 20 signings or so, which is essentially a squad. I know some of them haven't actually really been playing all that much. Like Johnny Kerry's mostly the B team. Ideguchi's been injured, that kind of thing. But regardless, it is a lot of turnover, and it was needed last summer as well. I think everybody would agree, just the state that he found it in. He was always going to need to sign a lot of players. But in terms of the 2 yesterday, I think my thoughts have been broadcast on here the past couple of weeks, but also in the newsletter that we do for the website that I'll put the link to in the comments. As I said yesterday, although I do think with Aaron Mooy, it's probably the wrong stage of his career and the wrong stage of the squad's development. In an ideal world, I've talked myself round to the idea in the sense that he offers kind of known quantity cover for the midfielders that are there already in both the 6 and the 8, and can allow Ange Postecoglou to kind of chop and change a wee bit more as a result. It's probably not what people were expecting. In fact, you can see from the kind of divisive reaction that it's not necessarily what people were expecting for that area of the pitch. But I still do think it could be useful.
I don't think there's any doubt about that. I genuinely don't. I think he's a player who's well known to Ange Postecoglou. I think when we spoke about this yesterday, about when you have trust in the bank and you have a kind of blind faith in what people do, and that boils down to presenting a winning and successful team in the park, that all of a sudden, you can walk on water. But I think he does know him. I think he knows the player. He knows the system he wants to play. He knows the personnel that suit it. I think it's fairly low risk when you look at the financial circumstances around it. When you look at the length of contract, you're not looking at a 4-year contract for someone who's not played an awful lot of football. I think in terms of the outlay, it presents a fairly low-key arrival. But I think he does have there's an industry about him. I think there's a work rate about him that I think might fit in to Celtic and how they play at times. I don't think he will, again, go back to what we said at the start of the week, I don't think he will dislodge any of the regular starters that are currently in front of him. But I think he will be an interesting addendum to what's there at the minute.
I've seen a few comments just saying like a defensive midfielder. It's probably because Ange Postecoglou kind of referenced that. I think he was asked about a spoiler type midfielder, really, is what he was asked, rather than an athleticness, just a necessarily athletic midfielder. And he says that's not really my type of player, that kind of thing. And there's a few comments coming in over the last couple of days just saying that it's quite obvious that he's not going to sign that kind of player, but or use that kind of player. But I mean, I always go back to, like, for instance, people were saying he won't change formation. He played a 4-2-3-1. He played back at some point as well with Australia, but he played a 4-2-3-1 with Australia, and he had Millie Jedinak and Mark Milligan in central midfield. So it's a bit of a stretch for anybody to suggest that he won't use defensive-minded midfielders. So I don't think that was out the question. It might not be his preferred type of player in general, but for me, it's a bit disingenuous to say he doesn't and won't use them. But plus, I mean, I've kind of reiterated all summer that I think I said any combative midfielder absolutely has to have technical quality or they'll get lost in this team, that kind of thing. So although Aaron Mooy isn't necessarily a combative midfielder and doesn't really fill that gap, as I say, I've talked myself around into, well, if the expectations aren't the marquee signing level, but they're just useful rotation piece level, then I think he'll be fine.
Yeah, I think so. And I think the 4-2-3-1 systems are a really interesting question. I think Ange Postecoglou played that in one of the earlier European games last season, if I'm correct in thinking. Someone might correct me, but I'm sure it's a system he used. Obviously, we know how he plays domestically and we know his favoured system, but I think that 4-2-3-1 is something that he might look to for European games, because we know how much he dislikes the word pragmatic, but I think it might lend itself to a more sensible approach in terms of European games without necessarily compromising the attacking philosophy of the team, but just adding an extra layer of protection in the middle of the park. And I think that's a very interesting system. And Nir Beaton's a guy that you would have thought could have come in and played that way at times last season. Obviously, he's away. So if you look at Callum McGregor, who else would go in and who could play alongside him there? And you're maybe thinking about James McCarthy or Aaron Mooy for those games. And I'll qualify that by saying I don't think he's been signed for Champions League football. I don't think that's the reason why he's there. But I think he may offer an alternative. I think he may offer scope to change things a little bit.
I want to say it was the Jablonec game that you're referring to.
I think that might be
McGregor and Sorrow is the two.
Sorrow was it? Yeah.
No, I agree, and I think it could be useful. It could be useful domestically as well. It's just a different option, and he can play as the sitter or one of a pair of sitters, or he can play slightly further forward. He's creative, and I think that I mean, as we keep saying, it's a known quantity signing. It was just the expectation level, really, for me. If the expectation levels are adjusted, the fact that he's not a marquee, combative, athletic midfielder to make the difference in the Champions League, and kind of acknowledge that it's a rotation piece that will be useful, then I think he will be fine. In terms of Jenz, again, I wrote the newsletter on him yesterday, which I'll put the link up to that as well. For me, and I used this phrase in the newsletter, it's almost a case of suck it and see, I think, because he's 23, but he's very much still a rookie in terms of senior football. He's essentially only 2 seasons. And I made the point in the newsletter that neither of the teams that he's played for in those 2 seasons compares to Celtic in virtually any way. And by that, I mean, they didn't dominate the ball. They didn't press high or effectively. And then in Switzerland, they even played in a back 3, which Celtic don't utilise. So on the face of it, again, we're speaking about Aaron Mooy not fitting the kind of mould of what people were expecting to be recruited in midfield. Jenz probably doesn't fit the mould of that kind of left-footed ball-playing centre-back that people were asking about all the time. But that said, he talks about himself and says that he models his game, or would like to model his game, on the likes of Leonardo Bonucci and Jerome Boateng. So they're definitely ball-playing defenders. So if that is indeed the case, maybe he's simply never been in the right situation to showcase that side of it. But he certainly will be now, because Celtic need their centre-backs to get on the ball a lot, so he'll have that chance to prove it.
Yeah, it's interesting too. I think, he's not signed blindly. It's not that, there's not been a pin put in the net of players, and he's come out. He's obviously been scouted. He's obviously been identified as having something that fits into the way that Celtic want to play. It goes back. I think sometimes you have maybe a couple of options in certain positions. It might not have been the first option. We don't know that. But I think clearly he's been identified as a player who has something to offer. Again, you know, he has nothing to lose, and Celtic have nothing to lose in terms of what of the length of contract and the loan deal coming in and seeing what he does. 23, I think the big concern would be the lack, I think, of regular football up until now, which would raise a question mark, I think. But again, I think when everyone is fit, when the squad is fully fit and available, I think you would anticipate it's the same defensive partnership as you saw last season. I think when Carl Starfelt's back, that he goes straight back in and he'll be brought in really to supplement that.
Yeah, I think so. I was going to mention here, Max Stark puts a comment, Big Yen seemed absolutely buzzing in his interview. It did sound as if he's no intention of going back to FC Lorient at any point. He seemed as if he was quite keen when he was linked last summer for it to be the case that he went to Celtic. And he referenced, obviously, that he played Fulham under-23s with Matt O'Reilly. He's a good pal of his. Peter Grant was his coach. He seemed very well versed in stories about, for instance, Andy Tom, because he's German as well and stuff like that. So the interview does bode well that he's going to embrace it. What I was saying about him saying he would like to model his game on the likes of Bonucci or Boateng suggests he will try and embrace what is required from a Celtic centre-back. So far, as you say, limited amount of senior football to really back up whether he can do it or not. And that's why I kind of use that term suck it and see, because you've got him for a season-long loan. It's an option to buy rather than an obligation. So from Celtic's point of view, see if he can do it and then take it from there.
Yeah, I would completely agree. And I think the Matt O'Reilly thing was quite interesting. I think obviously he'd been linked with Celtic last summer and it hadn't come to fruition. And then I think being in contact with Matt O'Reilly and sort of hearing about the club and hearing about Glasgow. And I also think it can be quite helpful for players when they come into a new environment, a new club, that there is someone there that there's an existing relationship with. I sometimes think it can help them just settle into a new club, into a new culture around clubs, because I think every club has its own particular philosophy and style. I think that can be helpful. I think he'll see it as a fresh canvas. He'll see it as an opportunity to make a name for himself. The chance is there for him. I think Carl Starfelt, is anticipated to be fit for the start of the season, but he's missed quite a decent amount of pre-season. It'll be interesting to see if he starts the season, and if he does, can he make enough of an impression that he stays in there? That will be his thinking. His thinking will be, give me an opportunity, allow me to show what I've got, and then we'll take it from there. But I think at the minute, you know what the strongest partnership is, you know what the first choice partnership is. Whether or not he comes in and disrupts that is up to him.
I think from his point of view, no wonder he was buzzing as well. Like, just in general, he obviously fancied it last summer, but just when you think of the trajectory, as you say, 23, not played that much in terms of senior football. So he's went from Premier League 2 with Fulham's kind of under 23s to mid-table in Switzerland, the Swiss Super League, to fighting against a kind of relegation battle in the French top flight, to now Champions League football.
Yeah, no wonder he's got a smile on his face, I think, but he will see it as an opportunity. I think all professional footballers back themselves. They all have an inherent belief that they're better than the guy that's got the jersey. They all believe that they should be playing first team football. They all have a real belief in their own ability. I think we've not seen a huge amount of evidence from it when you look at what his stats are, when you look at what he's come from. So it will be interesting to see what he does have to offer, but I'm sure he'll see it as a glorious opportunity for him to go, and he can make a name for himself at Celtic, and if that's the case, then it works well for both parties. But again, it's a loan deal. There's not a huge financial outlay for him. He's come in, and it can become a win-win situation for both if he goes and develops the way that clearly the club and the scouting network have a faith that he can do, and that he can adapt to the style of play that Celtic have got.
Now, speaking of kind of developing and it's a changing topic slightly to a couple of Celtic players who were in action last night in the League Cup group stages, Alison. Now, first up, Liam Scales impressed as Aberdeen beat Stirling Albion 5-0. Well, I say impressed. He played well, but I don't know if you saw the kind of mini protest, if you can call it that, by some Dons fans against taking any more Celtic loanees, Alison. Did you see that? No?
It passed me by. I was taking in the sights of water breaks at Alloa last night, which it's not something that you see very often. But so yeah, that passed me by. Obviously, we had a conversation about it, and you were saying to me that Aberdeen fans weren't too happy about Celtic loan deals. You can see their point of view. On one hand, you can see their point of view that why should we be developing players for other clubs? On the other hand, loan deals, when they're successful, can enhance your squad. That's the bottom line. I think you can win out of it. I think you go back, you look at what Ryan Christie done in his loan deal up at Pittodrie. I think it can offer scope to bring in a player that you might not otherwise have, who makes a very telling contribution over the course of the campaign. And I think Liam Scales is one that I think Aberdeen clearly like. Jim Goodwin clearly likes. I think they were very keen to agree a permanent deal when it comes to the end of that loan deal, and I think he could be a pretty big player for Aberdeen this season.
Well, those words that you said there about it allows you to sign a player that you couldn't otherwise sign. That is literally the words that Jim Goodwin used when he signed him. He has already made it clear that if he develops the way that he thinks he will at playing centre back, I must say, that he's every intention of revisiting it in January and asking Celtic if they've got a price yet, that kind of thing. But he did play well from centre back, as I say last night. It was his pass, an incisive pass right through the kind of left channel to Johnny Hayes, actually, that set up Christian Ramirez for the third cracking through ball. Aberdeen have actually got a clip of it up on their Twitter account, which I've retweeted for anyone wanting to see it. Aside from that, he kept a clean sheet again, and although it's early days, most Dons fans, and again I'll stress most, having seen that flag, have been impressed by him. Do you see him coming back and getting a chance, Alison, or cynically, even though he's playing left centre back, which is obviously something we've spoke about for Celtic, or cynically maybe is it primarily a loan spell with the intention of pushing any future price up?
Yeah, that's always that would be the consideration. I think it very much depends on how it goes. I think he's still unproven at Celtic. I think the jury would still be out. I don't think, certainly from our perspective, I don't think you'd seen enough to really make an assessment and a proper judgment. That's obviously different for the coaching staff, the manager who maybe watches training every day and can identify that there are players ahead of him in the queue to play. I think it's an interesting few months for him. I think he'll be delighted just at the opportunity to play regular competitive first team football and really showcase what he has. I thought he impressed in sporadic bursts at Celtic last season. And I think so much will depend really on how the season plays out for him over the next couple of months, over the opening half of the campaign. I think you might know more, and it might even be that there's no decision that way until the end of the season, till you get to the end of the season before you assess whether or not he goes back to Celtic and fights for the first team jersey. But there's a lot of players like that. I think even when Ryan Christie went to Aberdeen, he was nowhere near Celtic's first team. And even when he went back, and it'd been very, very close to agreeing a permanent move to Aberdeen, even when he went back to Celtic, it took until October, until that League Cup game, really against Hearts, a game that was played at Murrayfield, before he had an opportunity to get back in and show himself in the first team environment at Celtic. He still had to be patient even after a fairly successful loan deal. So I think it's an interesting few months, and I'm sure you'll probably embrace the stage that Aberdeen are providing.
I think the Ryan Christie thing, for me, he was arguably their best player that year. I was up in Aberdeen working at the time, and I think it almost gets underrated what he done, because he came back down the road and managed, albeit it was a wee while into the season before he truly broke in, as you say, but he managed to break into a team that had thoroughly and utterly dominated. It's not an easy thing to do. So I think it's underrated in that sense. With Scales, you never know. I think you didn't see any of them at centre back really at Celtic, even though he says that was his kind of preferred position. It was only really left back you saw him. So I think it's useful if he wants to make a case to come back and get a chance playing left centre back at Celtic that he's playing left centre back while he's on loan, and that seems to be the case so far. We've got a comment here. Kevin Ferrier, Adam Montgomery scored. He did. That's the next one I was going to mention. He scored, but he also set another 2 up and was called the best player on the pitch by Callum Davidson last night for his performance in St Johnstone's 4-2 win over Elgin City. Now, he's likely to keep playing further forward for Saints Alison rather than left back. And with the signing of Alexandro Bernabei plus the presence of Jota, Maida, etc., it's extremely difficult to see him coming back down the road and challenging, isn't it?
Yeah, I think realistically, when you look at what's in front of him, there are very, very talented players, but also established players now in front of him at Celtic. I think it will be really tough to dislodge them. But it's not to say that I'm sure that won't be his way of looking at it. I'm sure he'll just be focused and going out and playing as well as he can. Again, I think it's very important to play in a first team competitive environment. He'll be going looking to stamp his authority on games and then take his career from there. I would agree with you. I think at the minute, as you assess it right now, you would struggle to see a pathway into the first team at Celtic for him. I'm sure he'll use this as an opportunity just to really start off his first team career and put the foundations in place wherever that now may take him.
Now, speaking of challenging, Celtic versus Legia Warsaw tonight, Alison. Artur Boric's farewell match, of course. First of all, what are you expecting in terms of the team? Do you think Ange Postecoglou will go strong from the start again?
Yeah, I think he will. I think as you get closer to the first competitive game of the season, I think you're probably more inclined to see a starting lineup that's in keeping with what his thoughts are for that first game at the end of the month. I think obviously there'll be tweaks, there'll be changes. I think I don't know what the temperatures are like in Poland, but if Europe is anything to go by just now, then I'm sure you won't want to be overusing players in terms of the hydration and everything else and conditioning. So I'm sure there'll be ample changes at the break, but I think it might be quite a strong team that starts.
28 degrees at the moment, Alison, just before lunchtime, I think, over there in Warsaw. So I agree with you. I think there'll be a lot of changes, water breaks, maybe even that kind of thing. I think so too, though. I think he will go strong. I think he's shown this pre-season is different in terms of there's no qualifiers to prepare for, meaning there's no competitive matches until the league actually starts. So that kind of puts an extra emphasis on the friendlies that they kind of need to carry some sort of edge to not be caught cold when the competitive games come round, hasn't he?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's felt like an odd summer for Celtic, I think. I'm sure just because you don't have the pressure of those games, because normally by the time that first league game comes, the tone has almost already been set for the season. Sometimes I think those games really underpin the campaign at times. I think when you have a strong qualifying campaign, it can set you up. It certainly has you up and running in terms of that opening league encounter. I think without them, it has just all been friendly games. I think you don't have anywhere near the same edge, and I think I would say that even saying that some of the friendly games have been played with a bit of bite, but at the same time, I think without the edge of competitive football, without the pressure that goes with it, I think it's impossible to really artificially create it. I think you need to have the competitive games to bring that in.
Helen rightfully pointed out it's a 5 o'clock kickoff this evening, just in case anybody was unsure. Joseph McGonigal, the links are available. That's in reference to me putting the links to the newsletters, and they will be available soon. I've just been told the website's down at the moment, but it will be back up soon. In terms of something else, like in terms of looking out for things, as usual, what I keep going on about in this pre-season, I'll just be looking out for kind of learned behaviours in the players that show that they're taking stuff on board and embracing the responsibilities that Postecoglou puts on them. Again, I'd like to see one or two youngsters get some game time. I think what you say is about the heat and making a lot of subs might lend itself to that. And ideally, friendly or not, I'd like to see some improvements in the defensive sense too.
Yeah, I think that's been an area of concern. I think when you look at the goals that have been lost in pre-season, I think it's looked sloppy at times. They haven't looked cohesive at moments. I think there's been a few slack games and goals given away. What you would say is that middle to front, again, it was a story last season. I think Celtic look fairly devastating in attack. I think they look, they look menacing when they go forward. But I would agree with you. I think defensively, there looks as though there could still be a wee bit of work there.
So Artur Boruc himself, Alison, got to talk about him. He's the man of the moment tonight, as he is in most moments that he's involved in, to be fair to him. You just missed him at Celtic by a season, I think, eh?
Yeah, I never crossed paths with him at all. Only really in a professional context in terms of working, but I wasn't at the club when he was at Celtic. Bit of a character, I think we could say that.
Yeah.
And it's incredible that he's still going strong. It's instead the age that he's got to, and I think he liked some of the finer things in life. So maybe a surprise just how long his career lasted.
Goalkeeper though, Alison, goalkeeper.
I think he was always wanting to go back, and finish his career. There's never any secret of his affinity and strong passion for Legia Warsaw. I don't think there was any surprise that he wanted to go back there in the twilight of his career. And I'm sure it'll be a kind of carnival atmosphere tonight. I'm sure as he bows out, he'll want to make the most of it. And I think he's probably remembered fairly fondly by the Celtic support.
Definitely. For me, I don't think it's a stretch. I think I said this when the friendly was announced, but I'll just say it again. For me, it's no stretch to say that he's the best keeper in Scottish football over the past couple of decades in terms of peak performance level reached. I realise his detractors would probably say, well, that peak probably wasn't as long as it otherwise could have been. He maybe didn't make the move people thought he would make, because he obviously went to Fiorentina, and I think people thought he would go to maybe a bigger team than that. But in terms of peak performance level reached, I don't think there's been any better in the last couple of decades. Fraser Forster could make a grab for best Celtic keeper maybe after his last spell, that League Cup final match, etc. Potentially Craig Gordon could claim it on natural talent. But in terms of reaching a peak well in Scotland, I still think Boruc edges it.
That's an interesting conversation. That's a pub conversation.
That's a pub conversation that prompted it, to be honest.
It's an interesting one. I think he's very, very close to Arsenal at one point.
Yeah, I remember that.
It didn't happen. And I think he was a fine goalkeeper on his day. I think, and as I say, I think there was a real affinity from the Celtic supporters towards him.
I mean, remember some of obviously standout displays in the affection from the fans singles him out especially as well. But I mean, he got, I think it was 2008, he was shortlisted for the FIFA Pro World 11, and that he was playing for Celtic in Poland, so it's not that it was buffered by performances for a massive national team that gets to finals and stuff. So it was genuinely the level of performance he was reaching, and this wasn't like a shortlist that included like 20 odd people. I think it was him, Gianluigi Buffon, Casillas, Petr Cech and Van der Sar, I think was the other four. So like I think that says a lot.
Company.
Yeah, I think it says a lot, and sometimes it gets kind of forgotten that is the level that he reached, because he didn't necessarily stay at that level for the kind of a longer period of time. But for me, that's why I would argue, and I often do argue, mostly in a pub, you're right, that he's the best keeper of the last couple of decades to play in Scottish football.
Yeah, I think the only criticism would be that you expected him to sustain that level across a number of seasons and a number of years, which I think top goalkeepers do. I think it spans a particular kind of era, particular kind of spell. I think it faltered a little bit. I think he may reflect himself that he probably had natural talent that could and should have taken him further.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to argue with that. As I say, went to Fiorentina when I think a lot of people thought he would go somewhere a wee bit better, a wee bit more competitive in Europe, that kind of thing, even though they were in Europe at that point. And then it was like Southampton, Bournemouth, then back to Legia and stuff. So I think, you could make that argument. And although he got the longevity, potentially never reached the height after he left Celtic that maybe a lot of people thought he did. But I'm sure it will have a carnival atmosphere, as you say, tonight. But I think the game might carry a wee bit of an edge as well, just in general. I mean, the last time as well that Celtic played Legia, don't know if that will maybe be in people's minds or not with the ineligible player and getting the 3-0 win and qualifying and stuff.
Yeah, I'm sure it will. I'm sure. I think there probably will be a feisty element to it. I think the background of Legia too, and the kind of support that they carry. I think there will be an element of bite to the game, which I think helps Celtic. To be honest, I think at this stage, when you're so close to the curtain coming up and the start of the defence of their title, I think that's probably what they want.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Now, we're running at about half an hour here, so a quick reminder before we head off that we're once again running a Twitter competition. This time we're giving away a home top. So same deal as before, you log on to Twitter, retweet the post, follow the Celtic Way account, and that's you in the draw for this Friday, which is the 22nd, so only 2 days still left. I'll remind you again tomorrow, I'll remind you again on Friday in the briefing because we won't do it until after it, and I'll put the link in the comments. But yeah, I think we'll call it there for today again, shall we, Alison? Thank you for your contribution as always. Thanks for all the comments, guys. We appreciate them. I'll be back here tomorrow, so we'll see you all then.
Take care.
Cheers.